Hello friend, Chris J. Simpson here, author of the Amazon #1 bestseller, The All-Inclusive Diet, and I help people cultivate energy, restore balance, and keep the weight off. Have you ever wondered if the grains you eat help or hurt you? I'm talking about the grains that make up these two products here, your typical bread and bagels and pitas and muffins, or maybe something like this over here, breakfast cereals, for example, or maybe it's more of the pancakes and waffles, or maybe it's your chips and your crackers. These are all grain products. And have you ever wondered if these are the products that are giving you gas, bloatedness, just, gastric upset? And have you ever wondered if it's a little bit more serious, that maybe you're gluten sensitive, or in the worst case scenario, you have celiac disease, which is a disease that attacks the gut when you're allergic, highly allergic to gluten. Have you ever wondered if all of these products are the reason why maybe you've gained weight in the past? And maybe it's really the whole cause behind that obesity epidemic across North America. So if you've had these questions, so have I. And hopefully you haven't made a decision on that yet, because I really want to open that discussion today and really dive in deep to this really interesting subject of grains. It's so interesting because it's part of our history. Since the beginning of history, this is in the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia and on to Egypt, and all of these ancient civilizations were really solely created on the security that grain gave them. Because no longer did they have to wander the earth like nomads. They could actually settle down and have enough food to sustain them through periods where there wasn't any food and there wasn't any harvest going on. So grains are super important, but something happened. Something happened, in the last, let's say, 50 years or so, where now grains are being accused of a lot of wrongdoing. A lot of medical issues, serious medical issues like obesity and leaky gut syndrome and celiac disease, and a host of inflammatory diseases are all being blamed on grains. And that's really unfortunate, because we've got a great history with grains, and there's really some great stuff about it. Before I get into that, though, and tell you not just what I love about grains, but also what to look out for, and debunk some myths about grains as well, and sort of tell you what to do next going forward if you're gonna incorporate grains in your diet. I'm gonna get to all of that, but let's just talk a little bit about what grains are. Now, typically, your common grains are gonna be these. They're gonna be rye, they're gonna be buckwheat. You're going to find a lot of these in your cereals, for example. Barley. The most common would probably be wheat. You're going to find that everywhere. And what else do we have here? Corn is also another very popular one. Rice. Okay, if you don't see pasta there, it's because pasta is made from wheat, semolina wheat in most cases. So it is included, and these are the staples that make up all of the products that are really on our shelves in massive quantities. It's something, if you walk down most of the aisles in the supermarket, you're going to see a lot of these grain products, even in foods that you don't think have those grain products. That's how it's infiltrated our food system, and it's really important to us. Now, some uncommon ones that perhaps you eat right now, but most people don't, would be quinoa, millet, kamut. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing these ancient grain names very properly, but yeah, these are the ones that, if you're in the know, typically you're going to be choosing these uncommon grains more so than the common grains over here. So that is what grains are all about, and this is where you're going to find them mostly in products, as I was speaking. Pasta over here, you've got your typical semolina wheat flour pasta, or maybe you're going to find it in the not so common quinoa. And you can see that they're seeds. That's really what grains are. They're nothing but seeds. Now, of course, they've been transformed over history, and we're going to get into that, and that's what we need to look out for. But just a couple of more products, you know, your typical corn, and also your typical converted rice, for example, which obviously has been bleached and processed. But these are the products that these grains, okay, are being produced by. So now we have a little bit of history, and you're reacquainted with what grains really are. I want to tell you what I love about grains, because there is a lot to love about them. They did not sustain us, you know, for the last probably 17,000 years since written history was created by accident. That was quite intentional, because they really have an incredible energy, sustainable energy source for us. And that's because they're a carbohydrate, and that's also something that they're getting knocked for these days, because any carbohydrate source is being bumped around these days by a lot of critics. We'll call them carb critics. But what they do have, and what we needed then and what we need now, is a few things. First of all, fiber. Now, fiber is so important. You probably already know that, but let me give you my rendition on this, why fiber is so important for me personally, for the people that I coach. It's because it is the balancer. It is the almighty balancer of the gut, in the sense that it balances blood sugar, and it also balances your appetite. Now, those are two critical things within your body that need to be balanced. They really do. If you can't balance your blood sugar, you're going to be on that roller coaster ride all day long, with up and downs and peaks and valleys in your energy. And it's also going to affect your moods as well. It's going to affect your motivation. It's going to affect your relationships. So blood sugar stabilization is ultra important. And also our appetites, which also affect our moods, which also could affect our relationships. If you've ever heard the coined phrase, hangry, yeah, we're not so gentle, peaceful, and compassionate when we are hangry. So fiber is what does this. It slows down the digestive process. It eliminates the waste and the toxins, you know, that we take on with the foods perhaps we shouldn't be eating, and just, you know, the environment. These things are all eliminated by fiber. And again, it slows down our digestive process so that our blood sugar can stabilize, and we can have that equalized type of energy throughout the day, which doesn't leave us in either, you know, down in the dumps or high enough that we're going to crash later. So that's one thing. The second thing is your minerals and vitamins. So minerals, things like iron. You're going to find a lot of iron. For a lot of the women that I help, they are in desperate need of iron. A lot of them are anemic in some cases, or at least borderline anemic. And they need iron, and they can get this through grains. So it's really important. And also your vitamins, specifically your B vitamins. B vitamins have a lot to do with digestion, and have a lot to do with energy. So minerals and vitamins, they're in abundance when it comes to grains. The third thing is your phytochemicals. And the phytochemicals that are in plants, this is kind of interesting, because these plants have their own way of defending themselves, just like every living organism does. And they have these phytochemicals which basically defend them against things like funguses and insects. But when we take them in, we also get the benefit as well, because they're converted to antioxidants and enzymes. Enzymes for digestion, and antioxidants for balancing the free radicals that we have. Now, what you need to look out for, okay, is a few things. First of all, processed carbohydrates. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what happened some time ago is they discovered that they could take all of the fiber, okay, or the husk off of the seed, and get down to the pulp in the seed. Now, the pulp is where that rich carbohydrate source is. And that's what provides us with the most energy, and it also provides us with a lot of taste and texture. You know, sometimes the fiber doesn't taste all that good, and it definitely doesn't have the greatest of texture. You know, it's a little hard to chew on and hard to digest, but that's the whole point. And they took that away, and in doing so, they got rid of all of those great things I was telling you about as well. They got rid of most of the minerals, the vitamins, the phytochemicals, all that good stuff. They tried to put it back in. You know, you'll notice with a lot of these products here that they're going to add in a lot of B vitamins, for example, and minerals, and try to put back in what they took out, which I've always wondered about that. It makes me scratch my head. I don't really get it. You take something out to put it back in. When you put it back in, you're putting in something that's not natural. Now, the second thing you need to look out for is the quality and the quantity. So what do I mean by that? First of all, the quality. The quality of the carbohydrate. Is it whole or is it unwhole? Because that will determine, is it processed or is it unprocessed? Once they take out the husk of the grain, once they start putting in all those additives and preservatives, then it is not whole anymore. It is fragmented, it is altered, it is changed, and your body is not going to recognize it anymore. So really understanding the quality and not putting sort of all grains in the same basket, and looking at them appropriately, what is whole and what is not whole or what is processed, is the better way to do it. Also the quantity. I've always said math first, science second, in the sense that calories count and calories add up. And we've got some really good foods these days. I've got some organic cereal here, granola, which is oat, which is a grain. Now, I might be under the misconception that I can perhaps have a little bit more than I should of this particular product, because it's telling me that. It's telling me it's a great source of fiber, made with whole grains. It's non-GMO, okay? It's not genetically modified. This is, for me, a great cereal that perhaps I could overindulge in and justify it because of all of the great marketing that I see here. And this is what you've got to look out for, because the marketers know about our fear of grains and what we think grains can do to us. So of course they manipulate that. And they'll put, for example, on a quinoa, they will put gluten-free. Now, there was never any gluten in quinoa in the first place, okay? Now it's time to debunk some myths about grain. The first one is that grains cause weight gain and perhaps even obesity. Is that true or is that untrue? I'm going to say that it's untrue, and I'll tell you why. Because if we're looking at our quality and our quantity, okay, and we're trying to avoid the processed carbohydrates and processed grains that are on our supermarkets and in such a grand supply, then we won't have to worry about weight gain. In fact, it'll be quite the opposite, because when we're taking in whole grains, our weight is balanced naturally. When we're taking in whole grains, the digestive process is a lot slower. It's a lot more natural. We typically can't eat a lot of these type of foods that are natural and whole. They don't drive us to keep going back for more. They don't have that addictive nature to it. The second thing I want to talk to you about is, do they cause inflammation? What do I mean by that? Well, there is a lot of inflammation-based diseases that are crises right now in our society. So what's happening right now is a lot of these diseases are being blamed on grains. Now, that is unfounded. There's only one study that I could find actually that was studying people that ate grains. Do they have an inflammatory response? And what happened with that particular study is it was proven that they do. But if you look at the details, I think the study had maybe 100 people in it, and I think about 60 or the majority dropped out before the study was finished. And they based their findings on that last 40 or so participants in that study. And even then, the results were very inconclusive and didn't really point at grains being the culprit for inflammatory response within the body. Grains, they work well with me. They might not work well with you. In fact, a lot of people right now are under the impression that they are either celiac or they are gluten sensitive. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, celiac is a disease. It's a gastrointestinal tract disease where inflammation causes leaky gut syndrome. This is where the small intestine becomes permeable and allows a lot of toxins and bacteria into our body, and it's very dangerous, as you can imagine. This is an entity within us. It's its own ecosystem, and it's supposed to be separate from the rest of our body. And when a lot of these toxins, bacteria are allowed to permeate into our body, you can just imagine the toxic shock in some cases that our bodies would go through. So it's very, very serious. But the case of the matter is there's about 1% is what they're showing of people in North America population that actually are celiac. Now there's about 20 to 30% of people that think that they are gluten sensitive, and they might be. First of all, what is gluten? Gluten is sort of the glue that holds together the grain itself. And it's a protein, and it can be described as being like a tent, in the sense that with a tent you've got structure, you've got some poles, and you've also got some vinyl or some sort of covering around it, which is supported by the poles. And it's also very flexible as well. And that perfectly describes gluten and what it can do to our foods, because when we put grains together in products like bread, for example, you've got something that's really tasty and chewy. And that's because of the binding and the flexibility that the gluten allows that bread to have. So gluten's not a bad thing. Gluten is a natural thing. It actually was part of the grain in the first place. It doesn't need to be taken out unless you think that you're gluten sensitive. And if you do think that, there's a couple of things I'm going to ask you to do. But before that, I want to tell you about a story. I was helping a client of mine, and he thought that he was gluten sensitive. And he thought that because he went out for pizza a couple of nights before we had this conversation, and he said that afterwards he had the symptoms of someone that was gluten sensitive. So he had diarrhea, he had excessive bloating and gas. Very uncomfortable situation, obviously. So he didn't want to go through that because he'd been going through that for most of his life, actually. So what I asked him is some really important questions. First of all, I asked him what kind of pizza it was. Quality. He told me it was the typical wheat, deep dish type of pizza. So there was a lot of white dough there, or wheat dough going on. Second thing, I asked him quantity. How many slices of pizza did you have? He told me he had 6 slices. What? There's the problem. The quality and the quantity. And I keep going back to that because you're going to have another level of awareness, and a lot of the problems and perhaps a lot of the perceived health problems you have will be solved just based on that level of awareness of knowing the quality of the food, of all foods, not just grains that you're taking into your body, and also just how much. Is it 1 handful or is it 2? Is it 1 slice of pizza or is it 6? Like, these are really important questions you need to be aware of. I don't need you to go around with pen and paper or even one of those food logs. That's not even mandatory. This is something that you can do optionally. It's something that I do whenever I need to get a little stricter with myself if I've fallen off the wagon a little bit. But this is just something you can do visually and just be conscious of. And I need you to do that because otherwise, there's going to be a lot of foods, not just grains, that you're going to put on the banished list. And you're not going to be able to take advantage of all the benefits, perhaps, that they have because they've been banished in your diet anyways. So that's a really interesting story about being gluten sensitive. But if you are, there's things that you need to do. You need to get tested, all right? And if you want to do some self-testing, you can easily do that. And again, going back to quality and quantity, and perhaps you're going to want to write this down. You're going to want to log it. You can do it in one of those 1,000,001 apps that they have out there for logging food right now. But that's going to be important because you're going to have to really be aware of how you felt before you ate that grain or that certain product that perhaps has grain or gluten in it. And how did you feel afterwards? And more importantly, what type of grain and gluten did you have? And what was the quantity, more importantly? How much of it did you have? Those are important variables that you're going to log down. You're going to figure that out. Hey, if the problem persists, you can't solve it on your own, then you're going to need to go through some testing and really figure that out. Or make it really simple and just find alternative sources. Keep in mind, that not all grains have gluten. You know, the gluten is mainly found in the big three over here. They're going to be found in wheat. It's also going to be found in rye. And it's also going to be found in barley. So that's where you're going to find gluten. And ironically, this is where alcohol is derived from. When it's distilled, it actually eliminates the gluten, so you don't have to worry about that. But wheat is vodka, rye is whiskey, and barley is beer. How about that? But no gluten in any of those products. But these are where you're going to find gluten, and if you're having the ill effects after eating any wheat or rye or barley product, then you're going to want to go through some self-testing and maybe some medical testing afterwards to figure that out. But just don't assume it. You know, a lot of people like to point the finger at any type of medical evidence that's out there, and there's plenty of it, and it's changing every day whenever they have some sort of upset in their health. And I think they really need to take a look at themselves and take a look at their environment and take a look at their food in this case, or in this particular case, it's going to be looking at their carbohydrate sources that are coming from grains and perhaps that have this gluten agent in it. By the way, if you're a baker, you can find a lot of gluten alternatives to give that binding effect that gluten gives us in our baked products. And one would be guar gum, xanthium gum. These are somewhat natural, especially the guar gum, which comes from beans, alternatives that you can use, and they work quite well actually. So this is what I'd like you to do next. First of all, I want you to really get an idea of the quality and the quantity of your grain-based products. Now, I've got a free download actually, along with this post, where you can get a food journal or a meal planner, and you can really start to distinguish what grain products you're eating, and more particularly which ones have gluten, for example. That will really help you out. So just put your name and your email in that login form, and I'll get that out to you right away. The second thing is I need you to, speaking of quality, trying to avoid all of your processed carbohydrates or grain-based products. Easier said than done, I know, but there really is a lot of whole products out there. You know, I keep going back to this quinoa. It's something that I switched to probably a few years ago, and I was more of this kind of guy. You know, pasta was my only friend when I was a kid. This is a big transition for me, moving to that whole natural, unprocessed, carbohydrate, grain-based product, and I'm telling you, it was a lot easier to manage my weight, and I felt a lot better digestively when I made that switch. And lastly, just pick and choose your grains wisely. It's the seed of life. It's a seed of civilization. It has so much to offer. I don't want you to miss out just because of medical misconception and media that's going on there right now, which is trying to banish grains and empty the bread baskets of North America. There is alternatives out there. I want you to look into them because they will energize you, they will balance you digestively, and they will help you keep the weight off and keep an optimum health. Until the next video, my friend, please share this, please like this, please comment on this. I'd love to hear what you think about this. We'll stay in touch. Until the next time, my friend, inspire to aspire.